Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph will begin Daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, 10 lines from the bottom. We are still searching for the Tana to collaborate with Yechan's statement that he said that if someone was boil a Yavim who's a Nida, that he's potter. Where do we see a Tana that holds that this type of a situation would be considered Taya B'dvar Mitzvah? So the Gemara says, Allah Kirvi Yeshua the Truma. Perhaps we can say that Rav Yochanan is following the Shita of Rav Yeshua L'gabi Truma, which we'll see in a moment, and therefore he patters the Yavam in such a case that also considers it to be Taya B'dvar Mitzvah. Disnan Hayoyachal B'Truma, if a kohen was eating Truma, ben grusha ben chalutza, and then he discovered that he was possible because he was a ben grusha ben chalutza, and therefore he was a halal, and it's also for him to eat the truma. So now he ate the truma. He was also for him to eat the truma, and he ate the truma, but he thought that he was a kosher kohen and that he was doing a mitzvah. Rabbi Elazar mechayiv keren v'chaimish. Rabbi Elazar says he's chayiv. He's chayiv. Rav Yeshua paiter, but Rav Yeshua says he's pater. So you see, there is a similar type of a case that he attempted to do a mitzvah, and he thought he was doing a mitzvah, but it turned out that he wasn't. That it was also for him to do what he was doing, and nevertheless, Rav Yeshua says he's pater. The Gemara says no, you can't bring a raya from there because Dilma Kerabibi Barabaya. Maybe the case is talking in the circumstances like Rabbi Abaya says, Dama Rabbi Barabaya, B'Truma Ber Pesach, that we're talking about Davkan Erev Pesach, the Zmana Bo, that he's in a hurry. Meaning that maybe I'll tell you that if he's not in a hurry and it's not Zmana Bo, that he'd be Chayv. Rishu would say he's Chayv. And the case of Yavama over there, it's not Zmana Bo. He can be Miyamer at a different time. Why does Rav Yeshua say he's Potter over here? Because we're talking specifically on Erev Pesach. And he has to eat it before the Zmani Isser. After the Zmani Isur, he'll have to burn it. Now, the Torah says, V'ani hinei nosati lachem mishmeres from if it's also to burn truma, you have to safeguard truma. If there's no choice, if it becomes also, you have to burn it. But he's bold to eat the truma before it has to be burned. So here he's considered to be that he's toiv dvar mitzvah because he's in a rush to eat the truma before it has to be burnt. But in the case of Yavama, by the case of the Yibum, it's not someone a ball who says that Rav Yeshua would say he's potter in such a case. Or inami, you can give an alternate a reason for over here why we cannot compare it to the case of Yibum, because shiny truma degree avoda, because the eating of the truma is also called an avoda, and va'avoda rachmon ha'achsher, and the Torah says that an avoda is a kohen, even though he was possible, but l'maisa after the fact the avoda is kosher. So therefore, it's considered tov b'dvar mitzvah, also mitzvah. He did a mitzvah because the Torah is machsher it after the fact b'diavad. So therefore, eating of the truma, it's considered an avoda. It's also mitzvah. How can you compare it to the case of the Yavam, and where's the Yavam is a Nida, where it's not a mitzvah, where he's not supposed to do it, and it's not a mitzvah. This non-haya aymeru makiv of a kohen was make makiv the korbanos. He was standing and be makiv the korbanos. Ben Dirshu ben grusha ben chalutza. Then he discovered that he was ben grusha ben chalutza, meaning that it was possible. It's also for him to do the avodah is possible. Kol korbanos, kol and shehikra v'gam mizbeach psulin. All the korbanos that are makiv on the korban mizbeach are psulin because he was possible. But Rabbi Yeshua machshir. But Rabbi Yeshua says no, that it's kosher. He's machshir. Vamrinan, we say my time of the Rabbi Yeshua. Why should he say that it's kosher? He's a ben grush ben chutz. He's possible. Tirsiv barech Hashem cheloi afol yodav tirtze. And Hashem gives a bracha to cheloi, his belongings, and poil yoitze, and poil yodav, and the handiwork, the deeds of his hand, tirtze will be accepted. So this pasuk is talking about the avodah. The avodah of the Kohanim says, Yasim Ketzer B'Pecha V'Chalil Al Mizbechecha, and it says, Barech Hashem cheloi, poil yodav tirtze, that even the halalim, it'll be accepted. Therefore, it is kosher. So Rashi learns that it's the avodah that he does before discovering that he was a ben grusha ben chalutza, we say that it's kosher. But if he already knew that he was ben grusha ben chalutza, then it's in echanami, it is possible. The Rambam says no, that it's kosher after the fact, but the Yevid, even if he already had discovered that he was a ben grusha ben chalutza. But on Kol Panim we see that by an avodah that is tirtza, that it's accepted, and by avodah it's considered that it's accepted, and the Gemara says a truma, and we see with that truma we are in that category. Even avodah is also accepted. And for the Gemara of truma ikra avodah, where do we see that truma, that the eating of the consumption of truma is also considered an avodah, to say therefore that it's tirtza, it's accepted? The Sanya we learn in the Brisa Ma'aser of Tarfin, Shaloi Bo Emish LaBeis HaMedrash, she did not come in even to the Beis HaMedrash. L'shachas Maso Rabbi Gamliel encountered Amar Loi, he said to him, Maloi Vata Emes LaBeis HaMedrash, why did you come yesterday to the Beis HaMedrash? Amar Loi Avodah Avarati, I was performing an avodah. Amar Loi, Rabbi Gamliel said to him, Kol Toracha Ein El Divrei Tema, what you're saying are a mystery, it's wonder. What does it mean? It's after the Churban. There's no avodah nowadays. What he meant to say, the pasuk says, "Avodas matana etenes kunaschem v'azar akarev yumas." It says the avodah of matana I gave to you to the Kohanim, and one who's a zar, not a kayin, yumas. So what's it referring to? It's the avodas matana of the truma. And therefore also achilas truma b'gvulin, they treated the eating of the truma outside the Beis HaMikdash ka'avodas Beis HaMikdash. So this eating of the truma is an avodah. Avodas matana etenes kunaschem. The kain eats the truma, eating the truma even outside the Beis HaMikdash, even in the gvulin, outside the area outside Yerushalayim is ka'avodas Beis HaMikdash, like doing an avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Now we just learned that an avodah after the fact that it's tirtza, it's accepted. So therefore, eating the truma similarly is also. Therefore, if the kayin even he discovered that he was a halal, even if lamaisa it turned out that he was a halal, it's still considered that he did the mitzvah. So therefore, that's why he's potter. But you can't compare it to the case of the Yavam, who is miyabim denida, where we don't say that after the fact that it's tirtza. So how can you compare the two cases? So the Mishnah continues to say, then if someone shechted the Korban Pesach for those who cannot eat it, so meaning the Korban Pesach therefore is possible, so the person therefore is Machal Shabbos and he has to bring a chatas for Chil Shabbos. Why does the Mishnah, why does the Tanakh have to tell us that? It's Pasha Kevan Daha, some possible sense. We learned before that Korban Pesach, that is shechted for those who can't eat it is possible, so the Korban Pesach is possible. Over here, he did it on Shabbos, he was Mechal Shabbos, so Pasha that he's chai. More answers, Mishum the Tana Sefer Patur, because it tells us agav the case in the Sefer. The person shechted for those who can and cannot eat, so therefore over there he's potur. So that's why it tells us the first case that he shechted only for those who cannot eat it. So Tana Reisha Chayv, it tells us the first case where he's Chayv. Well, why does it have to tell me the second case? Hanami Pshit. It's also Pashat Mishum the Hasam Kasha, because we learned previously that if a person checks the Korban Pesach for those who can and can't eat it, the Korban is kosher. So if the Korban Pesach is kosher, Acha Potter. So there's no Chil Shabbos, and here is Potter. So that itself, the Chayra is not needed, is the Dover Pasha. Ella, the Gemara says, what's the reason? I need the Tana Shchata Shaloi Lishma B'Shabbos, Tana Nami Shaloi Loyachlav. And Chanavi, we don't need the case of Lo'echlav, and not Lo'echlav Shaloi Lo'echlav, but it's only Agav, since it wanted to tell me, it had to tell me the case of a person shechted Shaloi Lishma. So Agav, it tells us the other psulim of the Korban Pesach that we learned previously. In fact, the more V'hi Gufa, Lamali. Well, what does it have to tell me the case of Shaloi Lishma? We also know that. We learned that previously as well. More answers, Mishum the Gaboyle Plugi or Vilezer Yeshua, because it wanted to tell us the Machlekes or Vilezer and Yeshua that we shechted a different korban for the korban Pesach. So as an introduction, it tells us, it teaches us the halacha of the korban Pesach Shaloi Lishma. And like of that, it tells us La'ichlav and La'ichlav Shaloi La'ichlav. Amalei Ravuna Barchanina Lebreis to his son, Ki Azal Lekame the Rav Zrika. When you go before Rav Zrika, Boimine, ask him the following: Ledivra Aimer Mekalka Bechabura Potur. According to the Mandam, it says the Mekalka Bechabur, by making a wound, your potter. Generally speaking, by Shabbos, Mekalkalim are Petur. The Torah is Melechas Machshavas also Torah. Mekalkal, something which is a destructive act, which he's ruining something, destroying something, is potter. It's not considered a malacha. Is potter on for Chil Shabbos. It's potter from the derisive Chil Shabbos. But there's a machlokes legabe chabura of making a wound. Do we also apply mekalkal, the rules of mekalkal by a chabura? So he asks, according to the Mandam, it says Mechalkal b'chabur is potter, that you're potter even by a chabur, that Mechalkal is potter. So if that's the case, Shalata shaloi lo'ichlav chayev matiken. Well, if that's the case, the Mishnah said that if he shechted the korban Pesach for those who can't eat it, so the korban is posel, and he's therefore machal Shabbos, he has to bring a chatas. I matiken. If you're telling me that it's only a malacha, if it's not mekalka, well, this is a kilkal. So why should he be high for Chil Shabbos? Why, therefore, is he high v'chatas? More answers. Tiken imalu yerdu. There is a certain amount of takana. Now, even though it's not a kosher korban, but there is some benefit to it. What is that? That if the imur brought onto the mizbeach, they can be left to be burned on the mizbeach. They don't have to be brought down. So therefore, it has an element of a tikkun which suffices, which is sufficient to say that therefore it's a malacha. Well, what are you going to say about the case of a balmum? Now, a case of a balmum, generally speaking, we have a rule that psulim that occurred prior to the avodah, prior to bringing it into the base of Mikdash, we say im olu yerdu. You do have to bring it down. So in general terms, if the animal is a balmum, and nevertheless they went ahead and they brought it and they did the avodah, they shechted the avodah, even if they put the amurim on the mizbeach, that has to be brought down. So in the case that the Mishnah says by a balmum, well, why are you chai for Chil Shabbos? L'chayre, it's mekalkel. More answers. Tikin bedukin sheba'ayin v'alibid Rabbi Kiva damri malo lo yerdu. The mum in such a case, where will you say that he's chai for Chil Shabbos if the mum is dukim sheba'ayin, where it's something that's covered over the eye, a growth that covered over the eye, or a cataract. In that type of a mum, Rabbi Kiva holds, we learn out from an oif that by an oif, the mum that passes by an oif by a bird korban is a b'chus. The dukin sheba'ayin doesn't passel. Rabbi Kiva says we apply it similarly to a behemoth. So if we're talking in such a type of a mum, there also we would apply the principle im olu lo yerdu. Therefore, it's considered to be sufficient, a sufficient tikkun, and therefore it's not considered to be mekalkel, and therefore he is mechal Shabbos, and we'd have to bring a chatas. Gemara asks another question. Shacht of an imsa treifa. Well, what about the case of an imsa treifa? Shacht of an imsa treifa b'seiser potur. It says if the treifa is in a concealed place, which it wasn't obvious, it was concealed, the person is potur. So we make a diuk, how begoloi, but if it was in a revealed place, if it was external in a place begoloi, then chayiv, he'd be chayiv. It's only because it's b'seiser. But if it be goloi, be chayiv. If that's the case, it's a mum sheb'seiser. Over there, we don't say im olu lo yerdu. We'd say if they put it in a mur man mizbeach, you have to bring it down. So mati ken. So what is the benefit? L'chayr it's mekalkel, and he should be therefore patur. More answers. Tiken lo hitz midei nevela. There is another tikkun that it's no hitz midei nevela, that it will not be matama, that it will not have by doing the shchita the animal is dead, but it's not an avela. It's not matama tumus avela. Maskef lo Ravina has the following kasha hadasanya. We learned in the Brayse sheichet chatas b'Shabbos b'chutz l'avodah zara. If a person shechted on Shabbos achatas b'chutz, so he's over a koreas for shchutei chutz. He's over on Shabbos because he did the shlit on Shabbos. It's not a korban. It's possible. He did a shlit. He's chayv a second one. And l'avodah zara, he shechted avodah zara, so he's chayv koreas for avodah zara. So chayv ala sholosh chatos. So he's chayv 3 chatos. One of them is for chilul Shabbos. Ma tiken, what is the tiken? What is masakin over here? And you can't answer that he's masakin to be ma'asum tumas nevela because it's avodah zara, which is also matama. So it is matama. So what's the tikkun? It's not kosher for the mizbeach. It has a tuma. It has, regardless, it has tuma. So what's the tikkun? Amar Rav Avira, he answers shmoitzia midei ever minachai. There still is a tikkun because this animal now, because he shechted it, it's now a maitzimi de Ever Menachai. By killing it, it's not Ever Menachai, so it can be fed to a goy. It can be fed to a nachri. Without killing the animal, there would be an isser to give it to a nachri. It's Ever Menachai. Now the nachri can eat from it, so it has that element of tikkun. The Mishnah continues and it says, "Chalot of a night of a person if he shechted the korban Pesach," and then it was discovered that the Balaam withdrew from the Chabura. Then he drew from the Chabura. He's potter from a chatas. Omar Rav Huna Omar Rav Oshim Shenitek L'Re'iyah. If you have a korban oshim that is designated now to graze to develop a moon. So, for instance, you have a case where the owner, he was mechuyev a korban oshim. So he set aside an animal, he was makdish an animal for korban oshim. And now that animal got lost. So then he took a replacement animal, a replacement korban. He was makriv it, so he had a kapara, and now they found the first animal. They found the first one. So it's a case of an osham shekipru bala. In a case of a chata shekipru bala, the halach l'meish misina would be l'mis. We say by an osham, a korban osham. So, for instance, the person had to bring an osham me'ilas. He was moil from hektish. He had hanoi to partook from hektish. He has to bring a korban osham. So, in this type of a case where he already had his kapora by a chata, so it would be a musa by an osham. We say the halach is yershi staiv. You let it graze until it gets a moon, where now it's no longer eligible for a korban. You sell it. And you sell it, and now with the money that you got from the sale, so the animal is purchased by somebody who can now use it to eat the meat. The proceeds, the money that they got from the sale, is used to buy a korban oila, and oila is nidvas tzibor. That when it's leketz mizbeach, when the mizbeach is bottled, when they don't have any korbanos, they use this oila nadava. It's a voluntary korban, so that the mizbeach should not be idle, and it's an oila tzibor. So it's nitiklaria when it's already designated to graze. Now he said in the case when the osham nitikler ushach the stam and a person shechted it, and he shechted it without any specific intention. So now what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to let it graze, have a mum, and use the proceeds for an oil. But over here he didn't do that, and he shechted it even without a specific intention. He didn't shecht it with an intention that I'm being oikerit from an osham, and now it's going to be an oilas tzibur. He shechted it stam. It's kosher for an oila. Nevertheless, it's kosher for an oila. You can use it for this purpose. The purpose of the oilas tzibur. Al mekasavar loy boyakir. So you see the Rav holds that you don't have to redesignate it. You don't have to be oikerit from the status of an osham. It automatically changes its status, and now it's an oilam. So if that's the case, well, why is it only if it's been designated and set aside to graze? Even if you say it automatically changes to an oila, well, you should say immediately after the owner had a kapara, then that should be the status, even if it's leinitikleria. It should be automatically now in the status of an oila, and if it's shechted stam, it should be kosher. The Gemara answers, Ein Chanami, that midiraisa, that would be the case. However, Gzeira la'achar kapora, auto lifnei kapora. Midiraisa, that would be so. But we're afraid that if it wasn't designated for Re'iyah, if it wasn't consigned already to graze for Re'iyah, we're afraid that a person would think that even if it was before the owner had a kapora, that if it's shechted for an oila, that it's kosher, that it could be shechted for an oila. Now, it's halachas only if the owner had already had his kapora from an asham. Meaning, for instance, this animal was lost, he brought the asham that he's mechuyev, he brought a different animal for his asham, then once he had the kapara, then it automatically switches. But if you said it's kosher even before it was left to graze, people might think that this would be the case even before he had the kapara from the other korban, and if it was shechted for an oil, it would be kosher, which it's not. Therefore, midrabanan der geyser, that it has to be nitek l'riyah. It has to be only when it's already set aside and set to graze in the pasture. Umenot taimra, that where do we see that a person where we see that we make a chilek between lifnei kapora and lachar kapora, and that we're afraid that people will not make this distinction, and therefore we're geyser disnan. We learn from the following Mishnah: Asham shemei sabal. If you have an asham where the owners died, so that's another example of a case of an asham that has to be put out to graze. Or in the case which we mentioned, that the owner had a kapara with a different animal. Yira achi yistav, the din is that it grazes until it gets a mum, v'yimocher, you sell it, and with the proceeds, v'yiplodom of the nedor. And the money goes for an nedor, for the nidvas tzibur. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, he says Yomos. He says no. In this case, just like by a chatas is Yomus, he says that this case of an osham is like a chatas. Also, it's left to die. You don't use the proceeds for an oila. Rabbi Yeshua says Yimocher v'yav b'dom of oil. So Rabbi Yeshua says Yimocher, you sell it. When it has a move, you sell it and use the proceeds for an oila. Which seems to be the same thing as the Tanakama, but how Rashi explains is, the chilik is, Rabbi Yeshua says, you sell it, you use the proceeds for, after it has a mum, you use the proceeds for an oilas yochid, not an oilas tzibur. It's for the oila for the owner himself. And there's enough kamina that an oilas yochid, and nidvas yochid has smicha, there's a mitzvah of smicha to lean on the animal, and you bring the sochim. And according to the Tanakama, though, it's not an oilas yochid. Rabbi Yeshua says it's an oila for the owner. The Tanakama says it's an oilas tzibur, like case of mizbeach. There's no smicha, there's no nesachim. I'll go upon him. What do we see over here? That we see that it has to be sold and use the money for an oila. B'dom of in, it's only with the proceeds of al gufa loy. But you can't be makriv the animal itself for an oila. You have to wait till it gets a mum, and then faida, you sell it, and with the money you use it for an oil. Now, if it's going to be now used for an oil, so why do you have to do that? Why not just shech the animal itself and use the animal itself for an oil? Must be the gazer lacha kapora auto lifnei kapora. Must be because it's this gzera that we're geyser, that if we allow you to do it in this way directly, without developing a mum, you might do it even before the owner had the kapara with his osham, which of course then the animal cannot be used for an oila. So therefore we say it's only bedoma, but not with the animal itself. Must be because we are geyser that lachar kapara ought to lift a kapara. If we let you use the animal itself even after the kapara that he had the kapara with the asham, he might use it even before he had the kapara with the asham. So shmami, no, we see that we make this type of gzera. Rashi says the raya is from Yeshua, not from the Tanakama. Rashash explains because from the Tanakama, like we mentioned, that the Tanakama holds that the oil is used for an oilas nidvas tzibur. So perhaps over there that the reason why you don't have a raya from there, because perhaps over there the reason you can't use the animal itself, because it was previously it was to be used for a private korban, an osham yochid. Now it's going to be used for an oilas tzibur. So there you can't use the animal itself, you have to use the proceeds. But Rav Yeshua holds that the animal was an osham of a yochid. Now it's going to be an oila for the same owner, an oila for that owner, an oilas yochid. So why can't you use the animal itself? So from there we bring the raya that it must be a gzera, that it's exera la'achar kapara, auto lifnei kapara.